Hi everyone, and welcome to the weekly predictions based on astrology for the week of June 8, 2020. First, let's do a really quick predictions recap for the previous week. For the stock market predictions, I didn't fare so well. My predictions for the previous week were pretty much for the market to go down every day. And in fact, we had several days of really nice up rallies. We did have a mixed outcome on Thursday where Nasdaq was down and Dow Jones was like up 0.05%. However, for the most part, the week was actually an up week. In terms of other predictions, I did also make predictions, and I guess those are ongoing predictions as far as, not as far as, but rather for 2019-2020 regarding the increased seismic activity, geopolitical shifts, and various kind of tribulations, disasters, including predictions that I made in my annual predictions for this year of a increased potential for like a large-scale epidemic, just like we had with AIDS under similar transits. And this particular week, there was indeed an uptick in seismic activity, and we had several major earthquakes, including the 6.8 in Chile and 6.4 in Indonesia, as well as 5.5 in California. And then we also had some volcano eruptions in Costa Rica, and a spectacular video was caught of the massive landslide in Norway where 8 houses were swept into the sea. As far as geopolitical changes or leaders being removed basically out of power, I haven't necessarily seen something as obvious as literally a person being removed or stepping down. There are obviously some tensions at this time, but again, nothing that was specifically, I would say, new for last week, except maybe one that was related to my other predictions of the focus on oil and fighting. We did have news where I guess Egypt had came up with a proposal for, I guess, ceasefire in Libya. So let's see. So speaking of other kind of news, there was one prediction that I made specifically for the US, and that's from January 27 of this year through about December 7th of the next year, 2021. And for 2020, the important date periods that I gave were February 14th through July 7th, so we're still in that period, and also then later in the fall, November 16th through December 12th. And for the US specifically during those periods, I expect increased news about like either bankruptcies or end of a cycle for some companies, again maybe leadership stepping down or some sort of reorganization, problems with taxes, concerns about loans, rates, or being spied on or hacked. Let's see, there also, as I said, there would be increased news about some sort of secret communication, secret manipulation, whistleblowing, and some secret info may be revealed that basically reveal about some unsavory or some illegal behaviors, or in addition to that, or alternatively, the news may involve companies that literally deal with things that are underground, so some companies that do investigation, or perhaps coal or mining company, trash recycling, or nuclear power. And so this past week, there were two pieces of news that fit the sort of manifestation. We did have announcement on June 4th by the Securities and Exchange Commission that they awarded the largest in history Whistleblower Award of $50 million to an individual who provided some detailed information that basically led, I guess, to them being able to retrieve some money from a company that was doing something bad. And let's see, and also there's news also on June 4th that apparently some sort of cyber extortionists have stolen confidential documents that possibly contain information related to US Minuteman III nuclear deterrent. So, and those documents apparently were being leaked online subsequently. So whether or not those documents actually contain some confidential information or not, that I don't know. However, the fact that it was about, again, the nuclear related information, and that is again something that was hacked, leaked, secretive information, those are the kind of manifestations that I do expect, and I do expect sort of similar type of manifestations to continue this year through, like I said, about July 4th, and then picking back up in November, about mid-November to mid-December, but actually will also continue into next year. So again, news about like either these hidden situations, hacking, whistleblowing, some hidden dirty, secrets come out, and or just more news about companies that deal with things that are underground. Let's see. And of course, for this entire week, and again, starting from about end of May through what I was saying, will intensify this week, the week of June 8th through about June 15th, is the increased focus on all things Neptunian, such as oil, gas, anything to do, of course, with water, navy, fisheries, marine life, or just the shipment over the water. Gas, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, infectious diseases, mental health, hospitals, any sort of confused alternate state of consciousness, music, movies, drugs, excessively wet weather, and beverages. So anything that you can think of, basically, that's this Neptunian manifestation will be intensifying, or has been intensifying since May 3rd, or May 30th sometime, 29th, 30th, and will really intensify this week. So basically for last week, some of the predictions that I made also apply to this week, but they might include things like maritime accidents, fighting over religion, or attacks on places of worship, or involving religious maybe leaders, disagreements about pharmaceuticals, spike in infectious diseases, attacks again involving other ships or personnel like Navy, I guess sailors or something like that, or healthcare providers, or musicians, actors, etc., or explosions that involve oil or chemicals leaking or gas leaking and things like that. And so last week we did have some news specific to that. So, and also for last week, specifically for June 2nd through 7th, I made a prediction that these increased news about attacks may involve also specifically places related to retail sales, communication, transportation, and education. That was specific for June 2nd through 7th, and attacks including, that are related to the Neptunian sort of areas, such as, again, ships, oil rigs, etc. Those will continue through June 15th. So for last week, I did see news from China that apparently some sort of security guard stabbed around 40 people at a school, unfortunately, and students were injured. Then on June 8th, and I'm recording this on June 8th, which is Monday, obviously, of this week, there was also news about German police that have basically foiled an attack where a suspected right-wing extremist was planning to attack a mosque, against a place of worship. So obviously some of this may be thwarted, which is a good thing, but the theme of it, again, is places of worship, or leaders from those areas, or places where we have music and movies, marina, hospital, like some secluded location, or a location where you have a lot of people who are in some sort of a disconnected state of mind. Maybe they're meditating, or maybe they're sick or something like that, or they are listening to music, etc. So those are the places or people who are in that state of mind, who are again under influence of some drugs. This week especially, they're going to be more likely to attack potentially, or because they will be seeing things that are not there, like more intensely. At least that's what sort of traditional astrological interpretation of the ongoing transit is. And so in terms of predictions and manifestations that we seen last week, we did have news that WHO had basically resumed trials of the use of the hydroxychloroquine for COVID-19. Then we also had some news about the maritime accidents. On June 5, Iranian cargo ship had sunk in Iraq's territorial waters. Then we had some news about oil, specifically on June 6th, OPEC and allies have announced or agreed to the basically extending oil cuts until the end of July. At the same time, as already mentioned, on the same day, I guess the 6th, Egypt announced a new plan to end the war in Libya as Haftar offensive loses ground. So again, I'm not following the specific news as much. I'm just literally looking through major headlines, but my understanding is that Libya is an oil-rich country, so kind of fighting in that area or in those types of areas or having attacks involving, again, either areas or businesses that are relating to oil will be very strongly sort of highlighted this week, even more so than it was last week. Then we also had, unfortunately, some news of accidents, and again, this week it may intensify further. So these two come from Russia. On the 4th of June, prosecutors there probed a major fuel spill in Russia's Arctic, and basically a storage tank was damaged and about 20,000 tons of fuel had spilled into the environment, contaminating ground surrounding like rivers and a local lake, which of course is unfortunate because of the sensitive ecosystem and that area. And again, right about the same time, on the 5th of June, there was news that the Russian army was called to extinguish a blazing wellhead rather in Irkutsk region, and that fire had started on May 30th. And what happened, I guess, the mixture of oil and gas was injected into a junction box, whatever that means. And basically, I guess there was a depressurization of the connecting hose and it resulted in a fire. So that is obviously very unfortunate, again, unfortunately leading to contamination of environment, I'm pretty sure. However, this would be, I guess, the sort of benefit of using astrology for some of these activities is perhaps not planning such events that are related to oil and maybe something that's critical or risky or relates to fire or, you know, chemicals potentially. If there's a risk of, say, chemicals spilling, to not plan it for time where you have like these stressful aspects that specifically indicate that exactly such things might happen. And in terms of wet weather, of course, we had some news as well. On the 5th of June, there was some news at the storm Cristobal had brought record-breaking rainfall to Yucatan in Mexico, where they recorded about 278% increase over above, I guess, normal rain ever levels. And also the same day there was news I saw that I guess there was a hailstorm and heavy rain, about 74 millimeters per 2 hours, that fell and damaged crops and vegetables in Himachal Pradesh in India. And then I guess this week we again starting sort of, again, I predict even stronger focus and more of similar events occurring. So on the 8th, we did have, interestingly on marketwatch.com, I saw this, where apparently Chesapeake Energy's company stock, and this I guess is a company that is, it says is the oil and natural gas exploration and production company. So their stock trading had to be halted like 22 times, and their stock nearly tripled in about just one day. And that, I guess, is on hopes, that, because of the OPEC agreement, as well as just maybe hopes of the economy rebounding. Either way, it's a pretty volatile situation. Again, there might be more news like that about similar types of companies this week. Let's see, and then moving on to predictions. So the stock market, even though my predictions for last week's week being down did not seem to come true, I still predict pretty much every day of this week to be a down day, and especially the 12th of June. The ongoing predictions, again, seismic activity, geopolitical shifts, strong earthquakes, and this week, the entire week, may see some disasters, and particularly, I'd say, June 8th, and then June 12, 13 may have the strongest energy. Then upcoming, I guess, in, let's say, August, on off all year, but I guess intensifying towards August, and especially in US and China both, there'll be some period of concerns, I guess, not necessarily concerns, but increased news about either increased governmental regulations or controls or some taxes, embargoes, and those may lead to shortages or delays, or news about building some large structures, be it like a wall or a bridge or a dam or something like that. So some large government-led, I guess, initiatives, as well as government-led initiatives to control something or to regulate something, including like the trade, for example. Also, those may be accompanied by increased anti-governmental violence and various shakeups from natural disasters, of course, earthquakes, mudsliding, landslides, to corporate restructuring. And for the US, I would look specifically towards the period of August 13th through 21st, and for China, August 9th through 17th. And with the US, the focus, again, all of the same applies to every, country globally. For US, the focus may be a little bit more on like bankruptcies, as I said, loans, debt, taxes, and particularly businesses related to retail sales, communication, transportation, travel, social media, newspapers, car manufacturers, car rental businesses may suffer the most. And in China, the focus may be on areas like healthcare, pharmaceuticals, navy, various secretive activities, chemicals, oil, pollution, and recycling. As I said already, I guess several times, and in previous week's predictions, this week we'll definitely see increase in tensions, both internally within the countries and internationally, and there may be increased news about various accidents, fires, explosions, fightings, and I do expect still a large market drop, especially around Friday the 12th. And the fighting or problems may involve all these Neptunian areas, again, gas, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, infectious diseases, navy, transportation over water, fisheries, mental health, confusion, drugs, religion, music, movies, excessively wet weather, and beverages, especially alcoholic beverages. So the accidents or the issues may be something like a maritime accidents, again, some navy ship or just some fisherman, attacked or whatever, attack on oil refineries, fighting over religion or involving like religious figures or places, disagreements over pharmaceuticals, etc. And let's see. Then for US, I already mentioned that this is the period where there might be still continuing increased news about like whistleblowing, hacking, etc. So that still is in place through about July 7th. In terms of China and coronavirus outbreak, basically, I do think that there will be still increased news like this transit that we had seen in at the beginning of the news about coronavirus in China is not really done yet, and it will still continue and come back. And basically, the next time period I would look for is July 6th through 24th, especially July 11 and 12, and then October 26th through November 20th, especially November 9th and 13th. So those events at the time may involve some either major announcements or some sort of tally, like how many maybe deaths there were, or what are the next steps, or there's a regulation put in place, but some sort of a break in the situation, change in the status quo, and either reform is announced perhaps, and how something is handled, maybe some sort of reform, like a laboratory now adopts a new, way of, checking for leaks or something like that, or even is closed, or a new, again, vaccine is announced or something like that, or a new, perhaps, reform in, again, healthcare, or something along the lines of, like, again, a big change and something that's an announcement that is actually affecting larger groups of people. But in general, it's possible that this topic of COVID-19, specifically for China, may return with kind of more news, potentially next wave of infections August through November of 2020, and it's not going to be until the sometime end of November until I think we will have that this transit will pass, where things will start kind of that this particular pandemic will start going, I wouldn't say going away, but rather it will not be as prominent of a factor in the news. In terms of other aspects or transits for other parts of the world, when this whole epidemic had started, actually it wasn't, or it still isn't really involving Neptune per se as much. Right now, at this particular week, this month, if anything, we have strong influence of Neptune, which usually coincides with various like infectious diseases and outbreaks, etc. However, we do experience this year, and I guess particularly upcoming here in June 15th through July 10th, and then November 4th through the 20th, we will have intensified influence of Pluto conjunct Jupiter in Capricorn, and that actually is more kind of something to look at, where this to me signifies changes in basically power structures, and where it may also lead to increase in deaths or increase in secretive activities that involve some sort of manipulation, terrorism, or just again activities underground. Again, this may be something that's completely peaceful, just maybe more news about mining, but also could involve spread of radiation either through an accident or through some other means. And again, this may or may not be necessarily related to COVID-19, but times a little bit overlap, more so for China than for other countries. But I wouldn't be focusing so much on the COVID-19 being related to, again, Neptune, because again, Neptune is actually not as prominent in this transit. What is more prominent is this conjunction between Pluto, Saturn, and now also Jupiter. And being in Capricorn, this really relates more to geopolitical shifts, changes in the power structures, changes in basically relations between countries. With Jupiter, it also changes in international relations, in travel, and Pluto brings both deaths, but also transformation. Something needs to be, discarded, die basically before it is reborn. So changes, in, again, of course, we have as an effect of COVID, things have changed about how people say travel, where do they travel, how, under which circumstances. So all of that seems to be more highlighted as opposed to what exactly is the cause of that happens to be COVID. And yes, indeed, Pluto and Saturn conjunction do correspond with like epidemics, like HIV, for example. But the stronger factor here is more the effect of it, rather than the fact that people maybe are infected and are suffering from the infection. And as I mentioned before, we will have conjunction of Neptune and Saturn coming up in 25, and that's when actually, if there is and most likely there will be some sort of a, like what we had, it was a Spanish flu, was under similar transit, or if not the same exact transit, and that's when we actually may have a epidemic related to some sort of a infectious disease and inflammation, and at that time things may indeed be affecting people like on a physical level more so. Right now, this year, we have this really strong influence where indeed it may correspond to disasters. And again, that's how obviously you have large numbers of people dying, but also changes in, like I said, power structure, geopolitical changes in the earth, just literally shakes up, shifts, etc. And that is really what's more prominent than the COVID-19 itself. So let's see. So I'll get back to what I see coming sort of in the next kind of a glance ahead in just a second. So to continue predictions for this week, pretty much down every day, and especially on the 12th. Then on Monday, I predicted that there would be increased news about like spying, hacking, nuclear power plant, for example, or some sort of discussions about who is in charge, who is the leader, or where the real source of power is. I didn't necessarily see that, and I'm sure it's happening somewhere in the world, but I didn't see any headlines that I can come up with that matched that. Let's see, June 8th through 15th, increased focus on oil, etc. as I said. However, we also may want to trace back events that happened around January 25th or 28th, and right now we may experience this week sort of comeback of these events. So for example, there were tensions, I think, between US and Iran. Those may flare up back again. And also this week, there may be more higher, greater than usual, I guess, stock market volatility and increased news about various either infectious diseases, outbreaks, and this may or may not involve COVID-19. It may be a report of another wave of it, or it could be something along the lines of like fever, cholera, like dehydration, something that's spread via water or contamination of water. On the Tuesday, in the early morning, there may be news that focus on banks, finance, cryptocurrencies, as well as IT, high-tech, telecoms, social media, internet. And those news may bring some unpleasant surprises, like some project is abruptly canceled, or surprising start of a new project, or perhaps unexpected losses of service or abrupt connectivity issues. Let's see, for US, June 10th through 12th will also be important dates where there will be increased focus on leadership, and especially in the companies that are related to communication, transportation, retail sales, as well as banks, real estate, farming, and food production. There may be news about like the leader giving a public speech that's of some major importance, or starting negotiations, or entering into agreements, signing some contracts, and some issue may be at that time clarified or signed into law, or an agreement may be reached, and this particularly may involve agricultural products and tariffs or taxes. So let's see, and then on Friday, I'm the most certain or expecting the highest probability of market going down. And regardless of the direction, Friday definitely is a day to look for like a really major market volatility. And then, of course, it doesn't stop on Friday, but specifically Friday and Saturday, June 12th and 13th, I would look for a peak of hostile activities or accidents, again involving oil, gas, Navy, chemicals, etc. And the situation or events at that time, they may take place over water, underwater, near water, or involve a ship, like it's in a Navy ship somewhere, and or end up contaminating the water, possibly with oil or chemicals. And these may, involve, again, military activities, shooting, explosions, and fires. So going back to the just this last bit of my predictions, because this is running really long, basically, the next, I guess, a big sort of chunk of time with its own, I guess, flavor, so to speak, will start right in the middle of June, and it will be significant for both globally for all countries and for China in particular. And so I would look for June 15th through July 10th, especially end of June, so June 20th or 30th, and then in November 4th through 20th, and especially November 11th to 13th. And as you remember, this same time, November 9th through 13th, is really going to be important for China, again, with relation to the COVID-19, but also any sort of a pollution, all of these labs doing medical sort of research, or hospitals, or recycling. Basically, some important situation is going to be occurring both in the world, and for China, it's going to be, again, starting about mid-June to mid-July, and then again picks up around the second week of November. So globally and for China, there might be increased news about nuclear power, radiation, power plants in general, and recycling plants, shifts in governmental leadership. So again, power changes, and as far as like who's on top, who's the leader. So thinking power both in terms of like companies that generate power, but also power as in who's in charge at the government, or at maybe an established corporation. And so there will be increased in sort of manipulative activities, secretive activities, spying, hacking, underground activities. And again, that's why I said it may involve little increased news about, say, deaths because people will be buried, or some sort of situation that involves, again, waste storage or mining that is either again underground because it's secretive or underground because literally it occurs underground. And of course this would involve things like terrorist activities, but possibly also religious activities, and religious activities not so much in a sense of like a spiritual peaceful activities, but more about sort of like dogma type activities where there's some sort of a fighting over what is the right way to do something, what are the correct behaviors, correct values, and so on. And the nature of the news at this time may again focus on some sort of either expansion, so perhaps new religious rules or new regulations of how, say, places of worship should be, or who can go, or how they should behave there, or regulations of, say, power plants, including nuclear power plants, maybe new leadership at the corporate level, or a leadership is expanding, or power of the leader is expanding, or perhaps an accident or intentional some sort of activity that increases the importance of or increase radiation itself, or perhaps the focus may be on again increased news about death, transformation, rebirth. So maybe old things or old leaders or old companies are dying, maybe more bankruptcies perhaps, or literally some disaster leads to a large number of deaths, or COVID-19 picks up and again more deaths are reported, or some correction in the number of deaths, but basically news about deaths, or again literally deaths of humans, but also deaths perhaps of ending of some, corporations that were in power for a long time and now they just are going to be gone, and that increases, it doesn't increase, but rather it leads to a complete transformation in that industry. And that may be involving again some sort of a international relations, so it could be breakdown of some partnership, for example, or it may involve like I said, transportation or shipment internationally, international laws, immigration rather, anything to do with basically this, something that's like global or maybe long distance transportation. For China, it may involve perhaps announcement of some sort of a new trading route, and especially if it goes through any mountains or over the mountainous kind of area, or some sort of, it's high above the sea level, high above the ground. There may be some expansion of that for China specifically, and or there also may be increased news about prominent leaders who are either religious figures, diplomats, or some sort of like wise man, women or professor types. And also there may be closure of related businesses, like I said, perhaps due to bankruptcies, or because there's some sort of like a major disaster or reshuffling going on, and that just things need to adjust to new times, and basically it comes the end of that era sort of for some of these businesses. Or perhaps like a nuclear plant is shut down, or nuclear plant is reopened. And also there may be changes that involve either, like I said, international partnerships, where partners basically are being redefined, who is an ally, who's an enemy, and or in international groups, again, the members may be kicked out or new members may join. And again, things like immigration, freedom of movement across borders, long distance transportation or shipment will be affected. And again, this will be something fairly radical, some sort of reform, and old way of sort of being, old regulations will be changed with something completely new, and there'll be a lot of power changes, or direction about these changes will come from either governments or large corporations. And for China, again, at the same time, I think China will play a major role in these, because these are global transits, but also they happen to coincide with important transits to China's chart. And for China, maybe they will introduce again new regulations on, say, import-export, or like I said, there may be an announcement of a new international initiative, especially that involves, trade, shipment, long distance, and again, maybe even, a new large project, say like some sort of a train path or something like that goes, like I said, over the mountainous areas, or areas where were not necessarily considered to be profitable before and somehow are barren or something like that. So let's see. So that's about it, and hopefully this was interesting, informative, and not too much information that was covered in this short period of time. I do have a blog at plastunka.com where all of this is written, so feel free to check me out there if it's easier to follow written text. And otherwise, I'll get you here later next week. Until then, have a great one. Bye.